Hello and welcome to my video tutorial about the making of Control Panel. I'll start by giving you a quick tour of the Mac scene and head over to Photoshop to show you the techniques I used to get to my final version of the image. As you can see, the scene is quite simple and made up of primitives that I just use bevel and extrude modifiers to get the desired shapes. I didn't want to get too overcomplicated with modelling, as I wanted to concentrate on rendering and material techniques and lighting. For the skybox, it was just a simple sphere that I cut in half and just set the self-illumination to 100%. There wasn't much detail in the background, so there was no need for any images or textures to go onto it. And because the window, I wanted the light to bloom through the windows, there wasn't any need to add any extra detail. With the lights now visible, you can see that there's only 3 Omni lights. I kept the scene quite simple so I can keep on track with the lights and make sure the scene doesn't get messy. I had one main sunlight, which you can see here, which is placed just inside the window. All the settings I kept quite simple, I didn't really want to change that much. And on the left there is the filler light, which again is an Omni light, and I'll just switch them on and off so you can see that it just brings out the shadows a little bit more so it isn't quite as dark. There's also a blue Omni light just in the middle. There's a blue light on the actual control panel, so in order to fake the illumination I just set a small Omni light with a very small radius and just switch it on and off there so you can see. I'll now show you some of the materials that I used. Because I'm using Mental Ray Renderer, it enables me to use the Arc and Design material system that comes with it. It's only visible and selectable if you've got the Mental Ray Renderer checked in the rendering options, which I'll show you now. So you just click the rendering options, go to common, and at the bottom assign renderer, and I already have Mental Ray selected here, but it would be in your choose renderer options there. Just close that. Again, I kept the settings pretty much default. I just applied diffuse textures, specular textures and normal maps to get the details. And that's the bump map that I used to get the detail from the rust to the painted material. And that's the diffuse texture to go with that bump map, and you can see the rust there in the painted sections. And that's the specular map, and obviously you don't want any light to reflect off the bumpy surface of the rust, so you have black where the rust is, and where you want the light to reflect back at the camera you have white areas. And this is the renderer setup. In the filter options I set it to Mitchell to get a better final quality render. Also kept the bounces at 2 bounces, and the final gather settings was quite high. Because this is for a printable resolution, we need to make sure the settings are reasonably high to get enough detail into the image in case it was to be printed. And the rendering times were quite high for this image because of the materials that we used, so I'm not going to hit render just yet. So I'll show you the image straight out of the renderer just now. And here's the render straight out of the Max renderer. I've done no post-processing to this, so this is exactly how it came out of Max. And you can see it's quite a bit different from the final image, but that's okay because I see this as half done, and then Photoshop will do the second half and you'll get this image. And we've got nice blooming effects, nice depth of field, specular highlights blurred to give a photographed feel. Also there's noise filter and more specular highlights just in on the sides, and I'll show you how to do that now in Photoshop. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. A bad habit of mine is not to label layers. So I'll go through it and describe what each layer is and rename the layer as I go through it. So first of all, there's the final image that we want to achieve, and that's the Max renderer. This is the Z depth channel, and we'll use this later on for the depth of field using lens blur and filter. What we need to do is select all and copy and paste it in the alpha channel of the image. The lens blur filter will use the alpha channel to create the depth of field. The next image is using the lighting render element that came out of Max, and this is what this looks like. It's just a black and white image, and it shows you all the shadow details and the lighting that it's rendered without any textures on it at all. And what we need to do that is set it to multiply, so the whites become see-through, but that means the darks are too dark, so we turn the opacity down on the layer and it will get the right effect if you just manipulate the slider left right until you get the desired effect, and then we can leave that. And here I've just adjusted the levels, just brought out the darks and lights, as you can see there, swapping between them. And here I applied a photo filter, and this is just so we can get a different variation in colours, because again at this time I wasn't quite sure what colour scheme I was going to go for. If it's more red it becomes a warmer image, and the more blue it goes the colder it becomes. So I'm just selecting the photo filter and just scroll through the default settings until we get an effect that you're happy with at the time. I mean, you can always change this later if you're not happy. Just switching between the two. I'll stick with it for now. So this is the lens blur layer. This will help us achieve the depth of field effects, so we can create these nice little specular highlights and specular blurs that you typically get with a photographed image, which is just what we need as we're trying to create a photorealistic scene. So if you go into adjustments, lens blurs, in the depth map, if we can select the alpha channel where we copied and pasted the Z depth image earlier on, you'll then use that information to determine the distance within the image, and then you can adjust the focal length. then the radius of the blur. And as we reduce the threshold, you can see the specular highlights starting to ping out of the image. Obviously you need to be quite subtle with this because it can ruin your image, and then you can add your own noise, but I prefer to do that separately in another layer later on in the image. Here we've just duplicated the layer again and just added a bit of colour correction in adjustments, colour balance. Bring out the blues, reduce the reds a little bit, gives you cold, and then the opposite way gives you another warmer image. But I think colder will work better as it's a metal environment. For this layer I just adjusted the curves. Just bring out the darks and bring out the highlights more. But again, you need to be quite subtle with this as it's quite a powerful filter. Now I'm going to add the blooming effect through the window. And for this I'll use the lens flare option in Photoshop, which I don't really like using, but it gave us a good effect for this, so why not use it. I'll just position the lens flare just in the corner of the window, and then I selected the 105mm prime lens flare and adjusted the brightness until I get the desired effect. Again, subtlety is the key for this image. You don't want to overpower it too much. Here I just darken the left hand corner a little bit, just so your eye isn't focused down there and it brings your eye into the centre of the image where there's more detail and more interesting things to look at. For this layer I've added some noise. If I'll just zoom in so you can see when I switch it on and off the difference. Again, this is to help us achieve the photographed feel to the image. Again, you've got to be quite subtle with this because it can overpower the image and ruin your final look. Here I've added another levels adjustment. And one last photo filter to help me achieve the desired look that I was after. I thought the bluer filter helped me create a nicer overall image, made it look old, cold and dirty, which is what I was after. And I thought the red was just too warm, and I think it just went against everything the image was trying to say. And because of all the effects I've added to this image, I've lost a little bit of the detail, so I just added a sharpen filter just to bring out some of the harder edges. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed this making of the control panel. And this is my first video tutorial, so I hope it was easy to understand, and because I'm from Birmingham, you're going to have to enjoy my Midlands accent as well. But I really enjoyed making this tutorial and this image as well. It was a great learning experience, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. Thanks.